Saturday, April 23rd, and we're going to take a trip down to Bristol, Rhode Island with our Merrimac Valley Ship Model Club and visit the Herreshoff Boat Building Museum. They were the makers of some of the America's Cup racers and famous boat builder. In the meantime, this is a model that I built of the Blue Nose, Canadian fishing schooner. Get some of the details here. With a little bit of luck, I'm going to put this in a show in July. So it'll be the first time we've actually had it on display other than in my house. So that'll be fun. And just get one more shot here before we leave for Rhode Island. This is a canoe that I built. And it's one of 6 that I built. 4 for the grandchildren and 1 for Jane's brother. I bothered to weave the seats like they're caned. The paddles are what's known as a beaver tail paddle, which are very pretty. Always liked the canoe. And we're at the Herreshoff Museum in Bristol. And this bunch of guys down here are all our club members. It's the sign for the museum, and if we go back off across the street and pan over here, we can see a huge mast on this boat. This is an America Cup boat. Crowd's getting a little larger now. This is known as the Defiant. She raced in the America's Cups. This thing is just huge. And this is a tow tank model where they were designing a hull.
Oh yes. Me too. It's part of the whole thing.
Sure. Shipyard.
From my point of view, when I first came here and I saw John's name on a flyer or something, I said, gee, that's not a common name. And I knew a fellow from this area, his name was Paul Mary. And when I worked at Woods Hole Oceanographic, I sailed on the research ships, and the last cruise of a ship called the Chain, which was a Navy salvage vessel, I believe.
Right, yeah.
His brother was captain on that ship. On the on all the oceanographic ships, but it just so happened that his brother and I were on this. He was the captain, and I was the chief pilot. So I said, "Oh, are you Mike's brother?"
Yeah, he started as a mess boy in Atlantis.
Yeah.
So we have a saying in Rhode Island: you don't insult anybody because it's going to come back and haunt you.
Somebody's related to somebody.
So anyways, John, how many people do you want to take at a time?
How many you got? About 30? About 15 is good. 15 is good.
Okay, so we do
Two groups.
doing two groups.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
So we'll do part A, part B. How many? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 here, and there may be 4 more coming. So why don't we take the first dozen?
Yeah.
And then how long? 15 minutes? 20 minutes? 20 minutes. This group can come back and sort of assemble here. You'll see all the people with their eyes wide open coming out. And then, so after you've sort of looked at the boats, which is sort of in this L-shaped area here, I'll see if I can open up the museum proper over here. And then you can go in and see the America's Cup Hall of Fame, some of the boats. But what we'll also do is we'll take you from this project, which is his model room and his workshop where he would take the half hulls, and then he would create the lofting plans. So I think part of the treat here today is Keith and some of the guys are lofting launch 199. I don't know if 197 is, you have a half hull of 197?
Yeah, the half hull, that's the one that's 227 is in that series,
I
right?
think it is, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know which, the model we have, what scale it is, so which boat it goes to, you know?
Okay,
The
but
scale change.
if you can sort of say it's
Yeah, right.
probably that
Yeah,
one?
Right, yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know the model, it's just,
Yeah, this is all right. We didn't do it. Okay.
yeah, sure. You're welcome to take any photographs you want in here. We have to just don't touch the models. We have about 500 models here, 500 half models. And you know, these are models from which the offsets were taken to define the hull of the boat. About 90% of the models are all done by Nat Herreshoff. We have models in also by his father, Charles Frederick Herreshoff, by his blind older brother, John Brown Herreshoff. We have one model, at least one by L. Francis Herreshoff, and we have models also by Sidney Herreshoff. You know, Nat Herreshoff had a number of sons. Sidney was the oldest. He followed Nat Herreshoff here at the manufacturing company. He wasn't an owner like his father was, but he was a designer for him, and he designed independently. L. Francis Herreshoff, Nat Herreshoff thought L. Francis should run the farm, so he sent him to URI, to Agricultural Engineering School, which he did. He then was in the Navy in World War I, decided he didn't want to go back to the farm, and he went off on naval architect on his own. In this room, with very few exceptions, these are all boats were built. One or more vessels were built from these models. We're going to start in the next room over here. This room is a rough replica of his workshop. He lived in a home called Love Rocks, which is just down the road, if you know where the Lobster Pot restaurant is down here. Just down the street, just south here. It's on the water there. He had a third floor of his home where he did his design work. Nat Herreshoff was a teetotaler. He didn't take any stimulants. He didn't even take coffee. He didn't take any alcohol. He would design in the morning, 6 in the morning or so. He would design. He would then go to the manufacturing company. He was the designer and superintendent of the works. So he had 3 to 4 draftsmen to work for him. He would bring in the morning design work he had done overnight, turn it over to his draftsman, and he was also superintendent of the works. He'd meet with his brother. His brother was 7 years older than him, John Brown Herreshoff, born blind in one eye, and then lost the sight of his second eye when he was about the age of 15. He was the president of the company and the treasurer. And then Nat would go through the works in the morning. He'd talk only to the supervisors, never talk to the workmen. When he saw something needed to be changed or they had questions, he had a little chit book with him. He wrote with carbon paper, he'd write out instructions. He might bring them back then to make red line changes to the drawings. He'd go home for lunch, Go through in the afternoon the same way, go home, and he would design at night. We have a number of his papers here. We have his naval architecture and engineering notes. He kept a set of naval architecture and engineering notes and defined information about each vessel. I'll talk about that a little bit. We have his diaries here. You go through his diaries. He always tells you what the weather was. He was, in those days, you know, people would work for the weather service. They were volunteers for the weather service, which I think was really connected with the Army. I think it was part of the Army Signal Corps or something that did a lot of weather. Is that right? I think so. And so he always tells you what the weather is. Not so much the temperature, but he always tells you what the wind is every day. What is in the morning, what is in the afternoon, right? And he doesn't report very much, but if he's tracking a boat, he'll report on the construction of boats. America's Cup boats, he tracked very closely, so he would say, you know, we got 10 frames up, you know, started shell plating forward, 20 frames up, stuff like that. Indicate what his life was like. He wrote on Christmas Day in 1900, splendid day spent working on a model. So that's Captain Nat for you. Okay. Maybe convex at the base, so he could carve in the hollows. But he has so that was his process to carve, and he would. So he'd be carving on here. He would he'd use battens, and L. Francis said he carefully lay battens and chalk them. There's chalk up here. And he would lay across the hull so he'd get it smooth, take out the hollows. L. Francis said he carefully selected the battens for a model, and he knew that if he could lay that batten fair across the hull, he could lay the planking fair across the hull. So I should have said, you know, when he started out the model, he lays out his 10 stations on here, and then he may use paper templates. The model is then taken, he takes it off there and brings it over to this flat plate. And he would lay out the model in here, and he can pin the model. He can pin the model to this device. First thing he would do, he would lay out his 10 stations. Lay out his 10 stations. And he would use this planimeter. With the planimeter, he would trace the hull. He would trace the hull like this, with this arm, and that would, on this device, would lay out the half breadth, maybe the cross section of the hull at that location. So he could calculate, he would take this pantograph, he would take a planimeter to that and run it around that, calculate the area of that. And so he would do that at each station, and then using Simpson's rule or some other calculating method, he would calculate the volume of the hull. He had worked out his preliminary estimate. He'd always work out a weight estimate. He was very close. He had a lot of weight information. He had a lot of history of weight. And so he would estimate his weights, and then he'd start figuring out the displacement and what water line this boat would float at. And sometimes, you know, you're designing for a rating rule, so you have to come the water line right in. So this might be a iterative process, back and forth, until he got everything right. And then his last step he would smooth the hull with some sandpaper. He never used sandpaper till the very end, so it didn't affect the sharpness of his cutting tools. The hulls are then generally shellacked, and then they're pinned to this plate here, and he used this measuring device that's made for him by Brown and Sharp. And the measuring device, so what he's going to do is now he's measuring the offsets for every frame. So that defines the shape of every frame. And so at he marks off here where each frame goes. He'll bring this device out to here, and then this distance is measuring distance off baseline,
Yeah.
and distance up here, distance off center line. He measures in feet, inches, and eighths of an inch. You can set the scales on here. Sometimes the scale for the beam might be different than the scale for the length, but he sets the scales here on here so it reads full scale. Wow. And so he'd come down here at various points, feet, inches, and eighth of an inch off center line and off baseline for here, 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 read down like that. That is then written into an offset book. It's a little book like this, and we have some of these. MIT has a whole set of them, but he would. It says 37.5-foot waterline cruiser. He tells you what the frame spacing is, because what he does, he gives this offset book to the mold loftman, who would then lay out on a mold loft floor a mold for each frame. They used a mold for each frame. A lot of builders would maybe only use mold. You'd use molds for every third frame. Herreshoff used one for each frame. That's why their boats are so repeatable in construction. So he tells you what the frame spacing is, and since this model is to the outside of the hull, he tells the mold loftman what the planking thickness is. So the mold loftman lays out these. At each frame he has in here, like frame 6, this is feet, inches, eighth of an inch off baseline, and feet, inches, and eighths of an inch off center line. So it'd be like 12, 8, 4. 12 feet, 8 inches, and 4/8 of an inch. And so the mold loftman lays that out on the floor. But then he's making a mold that's going to be the inside of the frame. So he tells him what the planking thickness is, so the mold loftman then subtracts planking thickness, and he tells him what the frame thickness is, and he subtracts the frame. And they then make a mold. They set those up upside down on the factory floor at the design frame spacing that he tells them in the book, and that's how they start, they lay in battens, they bend the frames. Their wooden boats are all built with steam bent frames, never sawn frames. He's known for very light construction. He believed that the hull and the planking and frame should work together, and the frame shouldn't really be a hard spot. I'll show you on a drawing some other things about his designs that help with the longevity. So that's the design process. He would also do a sail drawing showing the sail rig, and in his naval architecture and engineering notes, he would calculate displacement. He would always calculate longitudinal center of gravity. Very seldom vertical center of gravity. He identified the ballast, how much ballast for each boat. And he had notes on the design that he would record. He would, on larger vessels, he would record he would design all the standing rigging in his notes, and he'd do the sail, rough out some sail drawings. So those then are brought into his draftsman, and they would convert them into drawings, which he'd sign off on usually.
Yeah.
Usually he'd sign off on the drawing. This happens to be, if anyone knows, this happens to be a model of, this is a Sidney Herreshoff model of a vessel called Arion. Arion was built in the 50s, one of the first large fiberglass, probably the first large successful fiberglass racing yacht.
Yeah.
And it still sails today. It's been refurbished here recently. They have two 401s, one a powerboat, one a sailboat. But this is the way they recorded their contract. And unfortunately, there's nothing behind those to tell us what they are.
Wow.
That one here looked like it would be just a blade in the water.
This one here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no...
Yeah, right.
The original contract, right?
Let's see. So, these are, for example, in World War I, they had a contract to build oil tankers. And the contract was canceled because the war ended. But this is his model for the oil tanker. It was like, more like a barge almost. It's about over 100 feet long. But what he did, he modeled the forward end and the after end, and in the middle section was a parallel middle body. So so he just modeled the forward and after ends of the boat and did modeling it. His father, Charles Frederick Herreshoff, taught the sons how to make half models. And these are models by his father. And these are catboats. They start from about 1834 up to about 1870. Julia 1, 2, 3, 4. Name boat for your wife. And this is a drawing at that time of one of these boats, one of the Julias. They were also called point boats here in Newport, around catboats. John Brown Herreshoff, who was Nat's blind older brother. These are all half models he did, and most of them were done after he was blind in his second eye. And that's because his father helped him in doing those. Halsey Herreshoff, who started, he and his father and mother started the museum, and is a naval architect himself. He designed a lot of boats in the 60s and 70s. These are some, after World War II, a number of companies like Chrysler started building sailboats, fiberglass, and some of these are designs he did for them. And he continued to use the half model technique of his grandfather. This happens to be a Bristol 27. These are examples of Herreshoff drawings of a construction drawing. So if they're building a vessel, they would have a sail plan, and they'd have a construction drawing. This might be the only drawing for the vessel. It has sectional views of the hull. It has a list of material over here, and it has. So the hull was bronze. The underwater hull was unpainted, and they just used to go over the side with steel wool and mineral oil, and they would burnish the hull before the races. This is a Defender in 1895. Defender had steel frames, bronze hull plating below the waterline, aluminum hull plating topsides, aluminum deck beams. And it had few little structural problems. People criticized his use of aluminum because of corrosion, but he said it did what it had to do, which is to win the cup. This is Constitution he designed. This is Columbia. That's Defender, 1895. This is Columbia, 1899. He backed off in 1899. He went to bronze hull plating, steel frames, wood deck. Constitution, 1901. Lost out to the previous boat in the America's Cup trials. This is the first vessel to use what's called longitudinal framing, which is, these other boats, the frame spacing was about every 20 inches. It's almost like a wooden hull, except it was bulb angle frames. And this boat here changed the frame spacing out to 80 inches, and they were fabricated deep web frames, and then had small longitudinal intercostals in between. By doing that, he eliminated all lapping of the hull plating, so it had a flush hull. It was lighter by carried about 55, ballast displacement ratio about 57%, a lot of ballast, and it was cheaper to build. This is Reliance, Sandy's boat, and this happens to be Resolute, which is, these boats all in here are 90 foot on the waterline. These 4 boats are all the same scale. You can see what's happened. They're all restricted to 90 foot on the waterline. That was the American Cup rule. And, but what's happened is the overhang is getting bigger, because if these are all the same waterline length, you see they're getting longer as they come down. And this is the start of the universal rule. So this really was 75 foot on the waterline, smaller boat, 65-man crew, 34-man crew. This is an example of, here's a case where he used the same model for 3 boats. Sandy's talking about they're building a full-scale, they're putting a steam plant into a boat. And this is what that boat basically is. This is 199, and this is a 28-foot launch. I think.
You don't get that. They have that you look in. You turn the lights on and you look in. That's all you do. How was it?
Yeah, no, I was round 2.
We're part of round 2.
Anybody
There's a engineering project. Might use one of
That
Sam's.
boat right there is built 19. You would sit up and see it, chill up on the top.
Yeah.
Is that the bottom? Yeah, I'm gonna think that must still work. I'm gonna still float. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he said it was L-shaped, and he couldn't see where the L went, but it's underneath.
Wow.
Pretty wild. Yeah.
The easiest way maybe to, we pull this thing out almost to the very end. We take off those triangle gussets. And then you do your lining up. Okay. Let's do it that way.
All right. You're lifting on sliding?
Yeah. Can you do it?
It's a gorgeous yacht.
Wish I had drilled it was long enough for the canal.
Sam, the other guy came this summer and told you that I bring his property. The poles here, you got some head guys I took pictures of.
You look upright.
I have. Isn't that amazing? It's a catamaran.
Yeah.
Yep. It's hanging in
You got
the,
canoe hulls that make that one, right?
yeah, 2 canoe hulls and a trampoline.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Imagine designing these things just by looking at that block of wood.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
The boat that's down at the end, that's a replica.
It's a replica.
Replica of one of them. It's really beautiful.
Uh-huh. Beautiful boats. Did you see this thing up here? It's a catamaran up and along the ceiling.
Just like everybody sees the wet paint sign, they go and touch it, make sure it's wet. Well, that's the mask right there. Yeah, I know, it's not that.
That's just the mast.
Oh, no.
The top mast can't get out.
Top mast. So this is a model they're building.
Yeah, this is the model.
And this is the mast for the model. A little bigger than the model. So I'm glad I didn't build mine this big.
It's 1/6.
1/6
And he's
scale.
got little guys that he puts on, he's got crewmen that he puts up
Yeah,
on
two-
the boat
2-foot
that are
crewmen.
gonna- that are just on this boat. He's like,
Repeating carbine company, huh?
Yeah.
So Herreshoff ended up with these buildings afterwards.
How you doing, Laura? Oh, look who's here. Awesome. So this is where Reliance was built, our model. Here's the boom. Okay. Here's the gaff. Here's our two yard and club. This is a piece of 225-year-old leather that was salvaged from a Danish ship that sank in Plymouth, England, carrying Russian reindeer leather. So that's what this is.
I'll be
Salvaged.
darned.
Pretty spectacular.
Just want to look at it.
Laura, who is doing a wire to Manila splice, probably one of 2 to 3 people in the world who can do those now.
Pretty sure there's more than that, but
4 or 5.
maybe like 20.
But here's the table that we're lofting that steam launch. So what you see is these are all the frames. There's actually a curved line here, which is a shear. The half breadth is there, and she's sitting on the body plan pieces. These are some of the other rigging that we've got that's ready to go down to the shop.
Fantastic.
What is the story on this one? This is a
So
little old.
in the 1890s, from 1892 to about the turn of the century, he built bulb fin keel boats. So 80, 90 years ahead of its time. This little white one is We Win. That's built in 1892. It's in here to be restored. And this was owned by Miss Winifred Sutton, an English woman. She raced it in Cows, England, and she beat the lads 21 or 22 times in Cows
was
that
really
year.
Thrilling.
Yeah. The end of the decade is Jilt. You can see it's a very modern hull form. Again, it's got the fin keel, it's got a little bit of bulb on the bottom, separate spade rudder, if you will, very modern looking hull form. This is one of there were a number of 21-foot, back in the day, the size of boat was measured by the water line, not the overall, so the 21 foot.
Now, when you do that, do you put new wood on it, or do you just?
We'll probably have to
Scrape it down.
replank it. If it's, unless someone comes in here with a lot of money who wants to restore it to sailing condition, really what you're doing is you're taking out the really rotted planks and replacing them, but you're stripping it down, recaulking it, making it look
Sure.
spiffy from the outside. If there's some broken ribs inside, you're not going to worry too much about that.
That's fantastic. Even the way it's lit is nice from the inside. See the taper of the planking. Fantastic. Well, now that we've finished the tour of the Herreshoff Yacht Company, we're headed to lunch. This is a place where a friend of mine is going to meet us at one time. Out onto Mount Hope Bay. And it's a good way to wrap up a very nice morning.